And which war did you serve?
I served in the United States Air Force in Vietnam.
Okay. What was your highest rank?
I achieved the rank of sergeant, which is an E4.
Okay. What were some of the general locations that you served during your time?
Van Rang Air Base is on the coastline of Republic of Vietnam between Cam Ranh Bay and Tan Son Nhut.
Okay. Now, were you drafted or did you enlist?
I did enlist in the U.S. Air Force.
Okay. What made you choose the Air Force?
In the late 60s, the Vietnam War was on, and I was designated as a draftee for the U.S. Army and likely to go to Vietnam, so I made my choice to go to the Air Force.
Okay. Can you tell me about some of your first days in the service?
Outside of Vietnam or in Vietnam?
We could start with your basic training.
Okay,
And then we'll
go from there.
away, yeah.
Okay. Basic training was at Lackland Air Force Base down in Texas, in San Antonio. My first duty assignment was with a B-52 bomber wing in the Strategic Air Command at Robins Air Force Base in Warner Robins, Georgia. I was an administrative specialist in the SAC command post, which means that we were on alert 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. I was there for about a year and a half, and at that point I wished to go overseas, and I was told that the only available location was Vietnam, and I took it, so I volunteered for Vietnam.
Okay. Can you tell me more about that administrative specialist? What
The administrative special,
it would be like?
right? It was administrative function, primarily typing up documents and controlling classified documents up to what we call top secret PSYOP, ESI. So the government had looked at my background and gave me the ultimate security clearance to work on these documents for the military.
Did you have to take a test to get that security clearance?
No, I didn't have to take a test for the security clearance, but they did extensive review in my hometown because people, when I went home on leave, they said, what did you do with the government? Because the FBI interviewed a lot of people, neighbors and friends, and they all wanted to know about Jim Baranowski and what was he made of. So didn't have to take a test, but it was a thorough review by the government.
Okay. How did it feel enlisting? What were some of your first thoughts?
As an enlisted man, being out of a small town called Mishawaka, Indiana, this was an adventure because I was 18 years old. So having never gone to any other towns or even flown on an airplane, it was an adventure for me. So by joining the Air Force, I got down to Lackland. I got over to Warner Robins, Georgia. So I didn't have any family commitments. I didn't have a wife or children or anything like that. So as a young man of 18, 19 years old, it was an adventure. So at Warner Robins, Georgia, I also took advantage of working on my undergraduate degree at night and studied at the University of Georgia, working on my degree.
What was your degree in?
Ultimately, I eventually, when I completed the Air Force, I finished my degree at Indiana University with a degree in business with a subsequent degree, an MBA from the University of Hartford years later.
Okay. Do you remember any of your instructors from basic training?
No, I really don't.
Is there any memorable experiences from basic that you would like to talk about?
Yeah, there was one. The drill sergeant, I was probably a little overweight, and I don't know what caused it, but he said, drop and give me 20. And it was like, okay, this isn't hard because I already anticipated that, and I ripped off 20 just like that. So I thought that was kind of cute. The other thing I remember from basic training was my beard growth is very heavy, so the drill sergeant would chew me out just about every day. He says, Baranowski, why didn't you shave this morning? I said, I shave every day, sir. So I was shaving like every 3 or 4 hours to keep this drill sergeant off my back. So those are the two things I remember about basic training.
Okay. Now, after boot camp, where did you head?
After basic training, went to Warner Robins, Georgia, and served with the 19th Bomb Wing. And we flew B-52 bombers, which were on alert, and KC-135 tankers. And I was in the SAC command post there.
Can you tell me about that?
That was very exciting because in the command post, you're at the nerve center, and the birds, the aircraft, are on alert 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. I got there in the late 60s, and some of the old-timers were telling me about their experiences that during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the bombers in Georgia, where I was at, were the crews were in the planes, engines running, taxied near the end of the runway, and we could have been off within 3 or 4 minutes heading towards Cuba or anybody else. So that's how close we were to some conflict with Cuba. So my experience was we did go through a number of alerts. In other words, the birds have to be off the ground, launched within 15, 20 minutes, wherever the crews were. Sometimes we passed some of those, sometimes we didn't pass them. Unfortunately, when we didn't pass them, I remember one time the wing commander in our organization got shipped off to another site. So those birds had to get off the ground, had to get off very timely, very strict regiment, and you had to do it. So it made it kind of exciting and sometimes nerve-wracking. I say nerve-wracking because they had these big bottles of aspirin, and they call it popcorn, and they would just be popping popcorn all the time. So between the aspirin and the coffee, you had to have people there 24/7. The warble would go off, the alert would go off, and we had to get those birds out of there. So it was exciting times.
Yeah. What was your now after Georgia? Where did you head to?
So I was stationed in Warner Robins, Georgia, and I wanted to go overseas. And personnel says, well, look, Baranowski, the only place you could go is Vietnam. So I volunteered for Vietnam. And that duty assignment was Phan Rang Air Base.
Do you remember when you arrived to Vietnam?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I was scheduled to arrive in Vietnam on or about January 26, 1969. On that date, my aircraft out of the United States was held up in Guam because the base was under attack. And we had VC zappers actually overrun on the base, put depth charges on some of the aircraft. We called them F-100s, fighters. And it was one of the worst engagements that the base had, and I just missed it by a couple of days. So I eventually got in like 2 or 3 days later, but that was my awakening. I do remember stepping off the plane the first day. It was like, and this is a modern airstrip. It had like 12,000 feet of concrete, etc. I could show you pictures offline if you want. But I remember looking at a distance and seeing some scant building. I said, what am I getting into? Do remember it was like 73, 74 degrees, which was the average temperature about all year round, primarily because the base was on the coast and there was a mountain range off to the base. And what happens is the winds would come off the ocean, go over the base, hit the mountains, and come back on the base. 73, 74 degrees all year round. Very nice.
Can you describe a typical day for you in Vietnam?
Typical day, that's a good question. In Vietnam, I was required, as most of us in the Air Force, were to work 6 days a week, 10 hours a day. We could have Saturday or Sunday off. I flew a desk, so I started out in personnel, and then I moved to the wing commander's office as his admin. A typical day in personnel was writing up or typing up a lot of commendation medals, and recognizing the efforts that the troops have done over there. One particular day, I remember that I was going to the University of Maryland at night, and for some reason I had exams, so I switched my days off. And most frequently, we were attacked with mortars and rockets at night. But this particular day, we were attacked during the day. And unfortunately, there was an airman who was on the other side of the base who was sitting at his desk. He got blown away. He got killed. But the thing I remember most about it is if I hadn't switched my day, I would have been in direct harm's way that particular day, because I usually went from the post office to the PX, etc., at that particular hour. And for whatever reason, God doesn't know, but I was fine. I missed that whole event.
So did you see any combat?
No, in administration in the Air Force, I did not say direct combat. The base itself was 7 square miles. Okay, so it was a big base. On the base, we had U.S. Air Force. We had 2 Air Force wings. We had Korean Marines. We had an Army unit with 155 howitzers, and we had Australian Air Force who flew B-57 bombers. So my involvement in terms of not any direct combat, I kept record of the number of mortars and rockets over the year and a half I was there. It was over 600. I could share with you in writing that's documented that Phan Rang Air Base in 1969, out of all the bases, Cam Ranh, Da Nang, Tan Son Nhut, all those bases, we were number one. We took more hits than any other base of the Air Force during that time frame. So the attacks would come at night, and there's the reason for that. The VC would try to disrupt the maintenance of the aircraft. So a maintenance person would screw up and the plane would crash during the day. That was one objective. The other objective was by attacking at night, the flight crews would get less sleep, and they weren't as sharp when they had to do their mission runs during the day. So most attacks were at night. There was one attack that I remember very strongly, that there was some threat of the VC penetrating the barbed wire, coming onto the base, and we did not have M16s at our bunk, but we had M16s in a cage locked up area. So the sergeant responsible for the area issued us the M16s. We had M16s. However, they did not issue us any ammunition. I said, what's going on here? And they were afraid that we'd shoot one another because we were Air Force administration and air mechanics. We were not direct combat. So I said to the sergeant, what do you want me to pull up my bullet and go bang, bang, you're dead. So I said, all right, you're a smart aleck, okay. But that's the closest we ever got. I do remember my early days when we were attacked at night that you could hear the mortars and rockets coming in. And you had a sense as the patterns. So we would say, all right, there would be number of clicks out, which is less, a little bit less, a little bit more than a mile, whatever it is. And they would be 1 or 2 clicks out. So the first attack, I jump out of my bed, run to the, grab my flak jacket, grab my helmet, go to the bunker, and hunker down. So after a while, this became old hat because I was a long timer there. I just, it's 3 clicks out, it's heading in the other direction. I'd roll over and go back to sleep. And the newbies would be running around like crazy, like, hey, we're under attack, we're under attack. Okay, we're under attack. Okay, so that's it. So no direct combat, but interesting times.
Now you said there was many different units, Australian, Korean, and American at this Air Force base. How did everybody work together?
The units had a lot of camaraderie. Back on the base until to this day, there are Facebook sites, one that I belong to, that over 40 some years ago we all connect. The Koreans were Marines. They had their own compound, and those people you did not want to mess with. They, because of their nationality and their language, they really didn't interact that much with the Americans. The Australians, though, great Aussies, great bunch of people. They did interact with Americans, and there were some good times with the Aussies. Army, we didn't see too much of the Army guys. They were in another part of the base, but we didn't interact with them. There was 2 major wings. My wing was the 315th Tactical Airlift Wing. We flew cargo. And then the F-100, which was the 35th Tactical Fighter Wing. The base belonged to the 35th Tactical Fighter Wing. It was not our base. We were residents on the other side of the base, and I could share some pictures of that with you offline as well.
Okay. Were you awarded any medals or citations?
Yes, I was. It was a very beneficial Air Force brief career because I was working for the wing commander. I did receive 2 United States Air Force Commendation Medals for my service in Vietnam. One I received in country after my first year. I did extend my tour of duty for another 6 months, and then when I left Vietnam, I got my second Air Force Commendation at Beale Air Force Base for my service in Vietnam. So most people, you don't get an Air Force Commendation Medal because you show up to work. So I was quite proud of receiving both of those medals.
Is there a good story behind receiving them?
Just a lot of pomp and circumstance. The military, they have parades, and they pin it on your chest, and it's just like the Purple Heart, or anything. You get a nice case, and you get a certificate and all that. But it's just pomp and circumstance for the most part.
How did you stay in touch with your family while you were there?
Well, 40-some years ago, there was no such thing as the internet, and phone service was very helter-skelter. They had a system called Mars. It's a relay system. I didn't use it that much because someone was always listening, and they had to switch the line back and forth. So my primary contact was U.S. Postal Service, writing letters home and getting letters. And I'll tell you, when you got a package from home, whatever it contained, that was great. It was very nice.
How did your family feel about you enlisting?
Well, that was interesting. It was probably very hard on my mother, even though she never said it. She just passed away 3 weeks ago at the age of 95. I was the oldest of 4 boys. My father had passed away when I was 16 years old. So being the oldest of 4 boys, and my father passed away, and as I said, the U.S. Army was on me because I was 1A. She never said it, but it was probably hard on my mother. My brothers looked at it from the point of view, because they're all younger, they just loved getting the letters from me and telling about my experiences. So, yeah, it was a trying time, I'm sure.
Did you always have enough supplies?
Well, that's interesting, enough supplies. So our mission for the 315 Tactical Airlift Wing was to fly C-123 providers. They're cargo planes. So we were the airline of Vietnam. So we had 3 missions. We flew troops around country, within country. We flew cargo. So if you needed food, rations, ammunitions, literally we would land the bird on top of a mountain to an Army LZ landing zone and get the hell out of there. So by flying cargo, you had the keys to everything. Every Saturday night, a box of steaks, a box of beans, and a box of potatoes would fall off one of these planes, and we would party. And we would party and drink, and it was a good time. So I never had an issue with supplies because being in the Air Force, flying cargo, working for a wing commander, okay, I had whatever I needed. In terms of food, we had a base mess hall, 3 square meals a day. They had these little jimmies for sea rations. I never ate 1 can of sea rations while I was in Vietnam. Didn't have to experience any of that. I went to lunch, I went to dinner, 3 square meals a day, and it was great. It was no problem. So I was in the right spot at the right time.
Did you ever feel any pressure or stress?
No, not really. Even though working 6 days a week, 10 hours a day, and going to school through the University of Maryland on base, no. There wasn't a whole lot of things to do. I remember after work we would play a lot of volleyball, and we got pretty good at it. That was recreational. We also had a number of things on the base. We had a base theater, which was air conditioned. We had an outdoor base theater. We had a track, and I was running 5 miles a day, and I was about 165 pounds. So I was one lean fighting machine. You didn't have TVs, you didn't have radios, so you couldn't be a couch potato. So you either did one of these other activities like go to school or work out. Some other guys, they might have chosen, and a lot of them did it, either gambling or a lot of drinking. There's a lot of drinking going on. Yeah, absolutely. But no, I really wasn't stressed by it at all, no.
Did you see any USO shows?
Yeah, USO shows. I'll share a picture with you later, but the USO shows, we had an outdoor arena, and it had a stage, it had seats, and they bring in the USO shows primarily from Australia. I never saw Bob Hope or any of those guys. and they would play all kinds of songs, and I wasn't stressed, but I was kind of depressed after going and seeing one because they get you all excited and all this, and then you go, oh God, I got to go back to work, and it was a letdown. It wasn't stress, but it was a letdown after these shows. I still went to them, and the shows were great. The entertainment was great, but it was a letdown, really. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any humorous events that happened that you remember while in Vietnam?
Worst events, the one we talked about before, we were under attack during the day, and I changed my schedule, and I should have been going down this particular path at that particular hour of day, and I should have been blown away, and I was fine. I did come down with pneumonia in Vietnam. We had a base hospital. We had doctors. The 35th Tactical Fighter Wing Dispensary. They got me mixed up with another Polish guy, and they thought that I was someone else that had already shipped out. And they thought this other guy used to drink a lot, so the ambulance would take him to the hospital. So they said, it's this same guy again. And hey, I said, no. So they took me to in the base ambulance to the hospital, and I said to the doc, I says, well, what's going on? He said, well, you got viral pneumonia. I said, viral pneumonia. Well, what does that mean? Well, it's some kind of virus, and we don't know how you got it. And I says, come on, with all this modern medicine, you can't figure it out. But the thing, I did recover from that, but the thing I remember, we were under attack one night when I was in the hospital, and the sirens are going off, wah, 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 wah. And the nurses, who are males, come running around, and they're shaking me and say, Baranowski, get up, we got to get you out to the bunker, we're under attack. And they went, wah. So I go, where's everybody at? I'm up. I said, where's everybody at? They said, well, we left you for last. I said, why? She said, you were sleeping so sound. I could have slept through the whole attack. So soundly, we saved you for last, and we took everyone else. I said, thanks a lot, guys. So I do remember that. It was, what a night.
Did you keep a journal while over there?
I did not keep a journal. I did keep a tally of the number of mortars and rocket attacks that we had, because the base would publish the number of rounds that actually came out of the base. They had this kind of a net, and the radar would be able to pick up the numbers and I did keep it. Unfortunately, I don't know what happened to it, and I no longer have it to this day, but it was well over 600 plus, and I could share that document with you. It's well published that Phan Rang in 1969 was the most heavily hit base by mortars and rocket attacks by the VC.
Now, do you remember your last day in Vietnam?
Well, let's back that up a little bit. So I was there for a first year, okay? And I was single, and I says, look, guys, I'm working for a wing commander. You gave me an Air Force Commendation Medal. I've got no commitments. I got no family, no wife, no kids, except I said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to extend another 6 months. And they said, okay, that's fine. So they extended me another 6 months. So I was there for 18 months, okay? Going to school, didn't have to pay taxes, got a 10% on the savings account, had another free R&R, another free leave. So I was coming down to the end of that 6 months, and I says, okay, guys, here's the same deal. I said, I will stay 6 more months, and then I will depart the Air Force, and I'll have completed my enlistment obligation. And I said, send somebody else home, send somebody. So they said, well, no, Nixon wants to send all the troops home. Keep in mind, 1969, there was over 500,000 troops in country. 560. I said, it doesn't make sense, guys. I said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I said, if you send me home stateside, I'm going to apply for an early out, go to school, I'm going to get the early out, and I'll be no value to the next duty assignment because I'll be there for a few months, get my early out, and there's nothing we could do. And this doesn't make sense at all. Well, they didn't buy it. The wing commander wrote commendation medal all the way up to PACAF, which was higher headquarters in Honolulu, and they said, no, Baranowski, we've got to ship you home. So it wasn't so much the last day, but that whole experience where, the military lacked some common sense. Send this guy who's got 3 kids, his wife is going crazy, send him home, I'll stay. They didn't buy that. But on my departure from Vietnam, because I had studied the Far Eastern civilization as a history course at the University of Maryland on base at night, and it was history about Vietnam, China, Korea, and Japan. So I'd studied some history about where I was at. So I do remember leaving Vietnam, and we flew into Tokyo, our first stop. So there's 240 GIs on this plane. One GI got off the plane and ran around Tokyo and went down to Kamakura and climbed Mount Fuji, etc. That was me. Everyone else was itching to go home. I didn't have any family, so I took a 10-day leave and ran around Japan. I didn't know when I was going to get back there. So not so much, like I said, the day itself, but those 2 events I remember very specifically.
So now, can you tell me more about any of your R&Rs?
Yeah. R&Rs. One R&R was to Hong Kong. Had 3 buddies. Coop was from Missouri. Greg Hines was from Pittsburgh, and Tommy Tucker was from Whittier, California. So we went to Hong Kong together. We had a good time. It was really nice. So that was one. Another R&R. Well, you got in the Air Force, you got an R&R, and you could take leave. So you got 1 free R&R, but you also had leave. So I took a leave to Expo 70 in Osaka, Japan. And I took my camera, my 35 millimeter equipment with me, etc. And that was interesting. Expo 70. Again, keep in mind, small town kid, Mishawaka, Indiana. Someone said on Facebook the other day, it's like Mishawaka is like Mayberry. Okay, yeah, it probably was like Mayberry. So it was quite an adventure to be a young man to see these places around the world. So I went to Expo 70, and the 4 of us, Greg, Coop, and Tommy, we went to Sydney. And the people in Sydney were great. We had a fantastic time. There was in 1 month's time, there was 43 aircraft a month going into Sydney. So keep in mind, you had 43 aircraft a month. Each aircraft had maybe about 260 GI, and each GI had maybe $3,000 or $4,000 to spend in 1 week, and they spent it. Okay, so that pumped a lot of dollars in the local economy. But the people in Sydney were just great. Beautiful people, had a fantastic time, enjoyed all of it. So after I extended my first year, I had a free 30-day leave. I could go any place in the world on Uncle Sam's dime, but I chose to go home for Christmas. So I also had another R&R, and I had another leave, and I went to Sydney a second time. I went again without my buddies. I was at Sydney twice, so it was nice. And on the R&Rs or coming back, most of the time I'd come back into Amron Bay, which is north of Phan Rang along the coast. So as I said earlier, our birds, we flew cargo and troops, so the birds were flying back to home base at Phan Rang. So I said to the crew, and they had scheduled, departure. I said, "No, I'm not going to do it." So I said to the aircrew, "Hey," I said, "you guys going back to home base?" "Yeah, hop on board." So I'd hop on the back end of the plane. They said, "Well, we're going to stop along the way." I said, "That's okay." So I remember we landed on some Army strips, and they're literally on top of mountains. So the C-123's got 2 jet pods on the end, and the jet pods, these were old World War II planes with props. And before that, I think they flew just without engines, gliders. So they put these jet pods on there. So what we were able to do, the aircraft was able to come in like this. We were able to land on less than 3,000 feet of runway, turn the bird around, and then take off again. And when we took off, particularly in the hot areas, you would see these mountains, and the VC and Charlie would take pot shots at it. So the game plan was we'd take off, we would just literally go like that. We hit those jet pods and we'll get the hell out of there. So I remember that coming back from an R&R that, we went in a couple LZs and mountaintops, and it was like night and day. I mean, I'm on a 7 square mile base. I've got, an air-conditioned theater. I got a chapel. I got 3 square meters. These guys out in the field, they don't have any of this stuff. And so, it was quite interesting.
How was your homecoming?
Homecoming. There was none. I got more thanks and tribute with the CCSU and state of Connecticut welcome home ceremony a few years ago, and the last event that we had up at Agawam, than coming home. I remember we landed in Travis Air Force Base, and there was 3 Army guys. They had shuttles, and 3 Army guys said, "Screw it, we're going to jump in a taxi and catch a civilian plane." So I said, "Hey, you mind if I go along?" And they said, "Sure, come on." So we flew out of Travis, and I think we flew into Chicago to South Bend because it would have been direct. But coming into South Bend, Indiana, I remember there was no one met me at the airport. Walking, just catching commercial transportation, walking down my hometown street, which was 2 blocks from the high school I attended, there was nothing. I mean, there was nothing at all. There was no banners, there's no flags, there's no thank you. Fortunately for me, I didn't experience some of the crap that some of the Army guys, you heard about. They got spat on and name calling and all that. I didn't experience any, but there was nothing. There was no recognition of that whatsoever.
In the days and weeks following immediately, what did you do coming home?
Well, I was focused. I was focused to complete my undergraduate degree because I started at University of Georgia, worked out at University of Maryland. So I enrolled in Indiana University at South Bend and worked on my undergraduate degree in business and accounting.
Did you make any lasting friendships from serving?
Yeah, the guys that we talked about, Greg Hines, Coop, and Tommy Tucker, we played a lot of cards together in Vietnam. I mean, keep in mind, there's no TV, no radio, so you either play cards I played or did volleyball or something like that. So we played a lot of cards. So we got pretty tight, the four of us. For many years, I was trying to run these guys down. And there's, in addition to the Facebook site for FanRang, there's about 800 of us up there with lots of pictures and lots of memorabilia. But there's also a site on the net called C123s in SEA, Southeast Asia. And I found Coop. And Coop is from Missouri, and to this day, still best buds. He served, and he went on to become a lifer. He achieved the rank of Senior Master Sergeant, E8, I think it was. So, of all those guys, the only one that I'm really tight with is Coop. There was a guy, didn't know him while I was stationed there, but he was in the same unit that I was. He was an aircraft mechanic for the 315th. And he was at a Quonset hut across from my Quonset hut. And John Jawan, he lives in Mishawaka, Indiana, and we're always sending stuff back and forth. So, but it's just hard to keep in touch and find these guys. You know, you think you know where they're at, but you really don't. Besides those couple guys I keep in touch with, yeah.
What did you do for a career?
For a career? Well, after I completed my undergraduate degree in business and accounting from Indiana University, I went into public accounting with Alexander Grant, which later became Grant Thornton, a CPA firm out of Chicago. And then had an opportunity, I moved from public accounting to corporate staff for Litton Industries. And I was on the corporate internal audit staff for a few years, and a position opened in Connecticut at the old New Britain machine division down there on South Street. They had 4 divisions, and I was part of the management team. It was a corporate transfer, and I became the corporate controller. Since then, kind of moved out of the manufacturing realm, and I spent the last 20 years in healthcare, specifically laboratory testing. First few years with Quest Diagnostics. Today, we're here at Clinical Laboratory Partners, the corporate headquarters and main laboratory.
Did you join any VFWs or American Legions?
Yeah. And there's a lot of guys on Facebook who are friends with me because, it's like small-time guy, did a great job in the Air Force, and I'm probably very conservative, not liberal at all. So yes, I'm a life member of the Veterans of Foreign War, Post 360 in Mishawaka, Indiana, even though I live in Connecticut. That's the only organization I belong to, but I do participate in other veterans organization, one that CCU participates in. It's called Wreaths Across America. It was last December. You guys are going to be doing that on December 12th, I think it's Saturday. I went to the event last year. I want to go again this year. I'll probably even help out, put some wreaths on some of the veterans' graves.
How did the service affect your life?
Service affected my life, and it was probably the best thing that could have been done for me. As a young man with no exposure to the outside world, going to all these places, meeting all these people, getting in all these situations, it took a boy and made a man out of him. Very positive. Very beneficial. Vietnam. I worked for a wing commander, studied University of Maryland, We didn't have to pay any income taxes. Yes, I was in harm's way. Got combat pay. If you saved your money, there was a 10% interest on your savings account. What's interest today? 0.1%. Yeah. So you made all kinds of money, and it was a great experience. It was all the right things. So very positive.
Do you attend any reunions for your unit?
No, I wish I could. Being that I'm still employed full time, the Facebook site for Happy Valley Phan Rang Air Base, Republic of Vietnam, has got over 800 of us. They do have an annual reunion. They just had it a few weeks ago in Charleston, South Carolina. And all the things I hear about it, it's great. They get together, they do tours. And I just, because of work and all that, I just haven't been able to get away. But hopefully I'll get away in the future.
Is there anything else that we might not have covered that you would like to add?
Yeah. Let's talk about the mission of my unit, the 315th Tactical Airlift Wing. Prior being the 315th, we were the 315th Special Operations Wing. So we flew C-123 providers with the jet pods. As I said earlier, we had a couple missions. One mission was to fly troops across country. We were airlines within country and flew cargo and supplies. Okay? Now here's where the dark side comes into play. We also had a third mission, and I could show you actual pictures of this happening. We flew Agent Orange. Our mission was to fly Agent Orange. So flying Agent Orange, you're familiar with Agent Orange, right? So for the record, Agent Orange is this chemical that causes all kinds of bad things to humans. So I remember getting this classified message in the wing commander's office because he got updates all the time. And I was looking at it and going over, and it said the communists and the VC said the Americans are hurting and killing and maiming civilians with Agent Orange, causing birth defects. Okay, Dow Chemical. And the U.S. government in the 60s during Vietnam said, oh, no, that's not the case. It's never happened. Well, guess what? They were right. We all know they were right at the time. So Agent Orange, we flew typically maybe 4 up to 8 aircraft, wingtip to wingtip, okay, and then sprayers on them. And the sprayers would go in and clear out LZs, landing zones, whatever. And they took away the cover or foliation for the VC to hide, all right? So if you were either on these birds or serviced these birds, you were subject to Agent Orange exposure. Go and have them sign up for the VA, then automatically it's assumed that if you're a Vietnam veteran, you were exposed to Agent Orange. My exposure to Agent Orange was primarily, they used Agent Orange to clear the brush around the perimeter and keep the foliation down. So I wasn't really involved with it, but you don't know how much of it was in the air. You don't know how much that you were exposed to. Knock on wood, I'm fine right now. But that's not the case for all the GIs that served over there. So the Agent Orange flew out of Benoit Air Base down by Tan Son Nhut. It was the 12th Special Operations Squadron, and we had a smaller unit that flew out of Da Nang. We didn't fly any of the Agent Orange birds out of Phan Rang, but they sometimes had to come up because we had the aircraft mechanics and we had to service them up there. The thing I remember most about those birds was because they flew low, okay, to defoliate. They flew low, make sure the defoliant got on the jungle. They were very subject to enemy fire, the VC, all right? There was a bird that we called Patches, okay? Patches got its name because it took the enemy fire, and the people who maintained the bird would put pieces of sheet metal on there like this. This bird had over 630, 40 patches of sheet metal. That's why it was called Patches. So about 10 years ago, I stopped by the National Air Force Museum in Dayton at Wright-Patterson, a big Air Force base at Wright-Patterson, Dayton, Ohio. You'll get a chance to go down there and see. It's great, particularly for your history book. So they had a Cold War building, and I said, "Hey," there was someone at the door there. I says, "Hey, do you guys have a C-123 provider in here?" He says, "Yeah, it's down there in the corner, and it's Patches." So I go, "You got Patches here? Patches is here? You got Patches is here? Really?" "Yeah." So went down there, and Patches was there. It was a C-123 provider. Patches, the same aircraft that we flew in Vietnam, that took all these, never got downed, never crashed, but took all those hits. And it's on display in Wright-Patterson, Dayton, Ohio. So I have to be very careful when I talk about my experience in Vietnam, particularly with other veterans when you're talking about the Army, because the Army guys are always subject to defoliation. You flew over and they got the stuff sprayed at them. So, I talk about cargo and I talk about troops, but depending upon my audience, don't want to say, "Oh well, we flew Agent Orange," because that's bad stuff. It really is bad stuff. So Agent Orange is a big part of the mission of the 315th Tactical Airlift Wing. Good question.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you for your service and your time today for this interview.
You're most welcome.